Hello everybody, and welcome to another exciting edition of Edpuzzle Lecture Notes. Today we're going to start our unit on ecology, the first of our 3 or maybe 4 ecology units. And what is ecology? Well, it's basically the study of ecosystems, but we don't know what ecosystems are yet, so it's the study of the interrelationships between organisms and their environment. So basically, it's the study of relationships between plants, animals, and everything else in their non-living environment. So the things that will affect plants and animals, like for example, water. Water affects plants and animals because plants need water and so do animals. Let's say temperature. If it gets too hot or too cold, that will affect both plants and animals. The type of soil. If the soil is bad, plants won't be able to live, and animals that eat plants won't be able to survive. So in ecology, there's a lot of relationships. A lot of times, plants get eaten by animals. And a lot of times, certain animals get eaten by other animals. And those are all affected by non-living things like water, temperature, soil, etc. And that's what ecology is. It's the study between those relationships between the living things and the non-living things in the environment. Alright, so here we go with some key terms. Might want to write these down in notes. I forgot to tell you that in our first Edpuzzle, but yes, these are lecture notes. When you're in college, your professor will be up in front of class lecturing to you guys, and you're going to take these notes down in your little notebook. Well, it's the same thing here, it's just on the computer. Our first term is called a species. And that's a group of genetically similar organisms. They can produce fertile offspring, which means they can have babies, and their babies can also have babies. A better way is to say that they share a common gene pool. The only problem with that is we don't know what a gene pool is yet. But for example, there's a species called Homo sapiens. If you didn't know it, that's the species you are. You are Homo sapiens. You're your own species. This right here is a type of mushroom. So there's a bunch of different types of species. Plants, animals, they're all their own specific species. Now, a very important term is a population. In case you didn't know, the population of Tulare is roughly about 60,000. But 60,000 what? 60,000 of what? Well, when we talk of population, we're usually always talking about how many people. And that's right. In Tulare, there's about 60,000 people. That's the population of people. But if you looked at the population of dogs in Tulare, that would be a different number, and that would be a different population. So a population is just all the number of organisms of the same species living in a given area. The next term, this is going to be bigger. They're going to get bigger. So population is just all the members of one species, like all the humans, or all the monkeys, or all the sea turtles, or whatever. That's a population. Getting bigger, the next term is called a community. That's all the population that are in a certain area. Or basically, a community is everything living. Everything living in a given area. So for example, in Tulare, the community of Tulare would be all the people, the dogs, the cats, the rats, the trees, the grass, everything that is living, like in this one, squirrels, insects, trees, shrubs, everything that is living in an area, that is called the community. So the only thing that a community that is not within the community is things that are non-living. And things that are non-living is like the soil, the dirt, the temperature, how much rainfall, water, etc. Those things are non-living. So those are not part of the community. But everything that is living is included in what's called the community. So remember, population is just all the members of one species, like all the dogs, all the cats, all the mice, whatever. Community is everything living. So everything that living is part of the community. All right, so which of these would not belong in the species level of organization in a marine ecosystem? We have bottlenose dolphin, Dungeness crab, shark, or elephant seal. Well, the answer to that, which one of these is not a species? Shark. That is not a species. That's more of a broad term because there's several different species of shark. Like this guy right here. That's the great white shark, or Carcharodon carcharias. That is a specific species of shark. You also have this other guy over here. That's a tiger shark. They're both sharks, but they're different species of shark. So these two guys, they do not mate and have baby sharks because they're different species of shark. The rest of these, elephant seal, Dungeness crab, bottlenose dolphin, those are specific species of dolphin, specific species of crab, and a specific species of seals. Now, a lot of times when I'm doing these Edpuzzle notes, my students don't like to listen. They like to be doing other things like playing games. So, oftentimes I'll drop in a little word that you have to remember. And this time, the word you have to remember to get credit for this activity, you have to remember the color green. We're doing ecology, and in ecology, it's a lot of times about plants. So I want you to remember the color green. All right, so my slides got a little out of order. Our last thing was community. Community. And remember, that is everything living in an area. Everything that is living in an area. So not the non-living environment. The next, getting one step bigger, that's called an ecosystem. So, an ecosystem is the community, everything living in an area, but also we're now including the physical, non-living environment. So the only difference between an ecosystem and a community is that an ecosystem is the community, but now you're going to add things like that are non-living, like water. You're also going to add things like temperature. How hot is it? You're going to add things like the soil. Is there good soil, or is it rock, or is it sand? Whatever. All these things affect plants, which then will affect the animals. So an ecosystem is everything living in an area plus the non-living environment around them. Now our next term is called a biome. A biome is really, really large. It's a very large area of land which has similar climate. That means it has like similar weather, similar rainfall, snowfall, temperature. Therefore, similar life forms, similar plants and animals live there. So for example, if you ever go to like Las Vegas, that's a desert biome. So it's a desert. So you're going to have things like cactus. You'll have things like rattlesnakes, jackrabbits, coyotes, things like that. So it's a very large area that has similar weather, similar climate. Therefore, similar types of plants and animals will live there. So in a desert biome, you're probably not going to see a polar bear. You're probably not going to see a shark because those type of animals do not live in that specific biome of a desert. And the last level of organization, this is the biggest of all, it's called the biosphere. That is basically the entire Earth where all life exists, on land, water, and in air. So basically the entire Earth, all of the life on Earth makes up the biosphere. Now, there's some things that can actually interfere or affect the entire biosphere. If an asteroid hit the Earth, that would affect the entire biosphere. All life on Earth would be in jeopardy of going extinct. Things like global climate change, where the weather is really changing big time, that can also affect the entire biosphere, all life on Earth. So all life on Earth makes up the biosphere. And now here's a little picture that kind of shows you what we just went over. All right, so the smallest little level is one individual organism. So you have the elk right here, one elk. A population would be all of the elk, just the elk, living in an area. That would be a population. Now when we go up to a step higher, when we get to a community, now it's not just all the elk. Now we got Mr. Moose here. Now we got the bobcat, the jackrabbit, the beaver, the owl, the grass, the tree, everything living in that area. Now that makes up the community. Now when we go up a step higher to the ecosystem, it's still all the living things. We still have like the bear and the grass and the trees and the eagle up here. But when it's an ecosystem, it gets bigger because now we're including things that are non-living, like the water, like the type of soil that's there, the temperature, etc. Now when we go up even bigger, the next one's a biome. So this is a very large area here in Canada. All that blue, that's a biome. This whole area here, their climate, their weather is very similar. Therefore, in this biome, you're going to find organisms, animals, and plants that are very similar. So like in this biome, you'll probably find things like grizzly bears, maybe polar bears, who knows, maybe even penguins. They'll all live in this biome because it has similar weather, similar climate. And the biggest of all is the biosphere, and that is the entire Earth. All life on Earth makes up the biosphere. All right, so these would be a couple of really, really important terms. The different components of an ecosystem, one are called abiotic factors. Abiotic. All you need to know is that abiotic factors are the non-living factors or non-living components of an ecosystem, but these do affect living things. So for example, water. If there was no water in Tulare, that would affect living things because living things cannot survive without water. Same thing with temperature. If it gets too hot, certain types of plants and animals cannot live there. So abiotic factors are all the non-living things that affect living things. Soil. Here in Tulare, we have really, really good soil, and that's why agriculture, farming is so big here. So soil really affects people because it gives them good land to grow their crops. So that's abiotic factors. You also have biotic factors, and that's the opposite of non-living. These are the living organisms, the living components of an ecosystem, which also affect other living organisms. For example, like predators. If you have a mouse is living, but a mouse is affected by an owl. How is a mouse affected by an owl? Well, owls eat mice. So Mr. Mouse is definitely trying to avoid Mr. Owl. But both of those guys are influenced or affected by the abiotic factor of water. Because without water, mice won't live and neither will owls. So the biotic factors are all the living pieces or parts of an ecosystem which affect each other, where the abiotic factors are the non-living things that affect the living things. All right, so here's a couple pictures. We're going to start with this looks like a savanna in Africa. Abiotic factors. Here's the abiotic factors, the non-living factors. The air, the temperature, the soil. How good is the soil? Is it good to grow things or not? And here's some biotic factors. You have these gazelles, the zebras. You have this tree, the grass. Those are all living. So everything in blue, those are the biotic factors, where the things in red, those are the abiotic factors, like the snow up here on the mountain. Snow is not alive, so it's an abiotic factor. Now let's go down here. Abiotic factors, once again, the air. Is it polluted? Is it clean? Who knows? The soil, in case you didn't know, dirt is not living. So dirt would be an abiotic factor. Now some biotic factors in here would be, of course, the zebra, Mr. Giraffe. Giraffe is alive, so it's a biotic factor. The grass producers, they're biotic factors. And the rhinoceros back there, those would also be biotic factors. So everything living, those are the biotic factors. Now, let's look at this picture up here. And I'm going to ask you to identify a couple of biotic and abiotic factors from this picture. We'll see how you do. Well, hopefully you saw that some biotic factors would be these plants, these lily pads, this fish right here, this bird, this osprey, these trees. Those would all be biotic factors. Abiotic factors in this ecosystem would be the water, because in case you didn't know, water is not alive. The air, the temperature, the type of soil, is the soil good or bad? So those are some biotic and abiotic factors in those ecosystems. All right, almost done for this little tiny lecture. Another very important term, which we should have heard in our last unit, are producers, or otherwise called as autotrophs. Autotrophs are organisms which are capable of producing or making food within their cells. Usually they use a process called photosynthesis, but sometimes they use another process called chemosynthesis. But if you can't remember both of those, definitely remember photosynthesis. So these type of organisms that do not have to eat, they're capable of making their own food. These are things like plants, like grass, trees, shrubs, algae, like the seaweed you see at the beach, or the green like slime that you'll see in a pond, and also some bacteria. So these guys, they're autotrophs because they do not have to eat. They can make their own food, usually through photosynthesis. So here's some algae right here. A lot of times these guys are green, most plants are green, and using the chlorophyll within their cells, they take the energy from sunlight, and they also use water and CO2 to make their own food. Now, I know you can't really see this right here, but it says, the sun is the main source of energy for all living things on Earth. So, no matter what you eat, that energy originally came from the sun. It was the energy from the sun. So if you eat plants, well, of course, plants get their energy from the sun, and if you eat that plant, you'll be getting that energy. And if you don't eat plants, no big deal. Whatever animal you do eat, like if you eat steak, well, cows eat plants. They get their energy from the plants get their energy from the sun. So if you eat cows, you're actually eating energy that came from the sun. All right, so on the previous slide, we saw that producers are autotrophs. These are organisms that can make their own food within their own cells. So these are things like trees. You don't have to feed a tree. Yeah, you have to water it, but you don't have to give them food. The tree's not going to eat it. They can make their own food. Producers, autotrophs. And the vast majority of them make their own food through a process called photosynthesis. Now later on this semester, we're going to have a whole unit on photosynthesis. It will be pretty difficult, but let's start learning it now. Photosynthesis means putting together with light. And it's the process by which autotrophs, or producers, plants, use energy to convert carbon dioxide, that's a gas that's in the air. Every time you breathe out carbon dioxide. Well, they use carbon dioxide and water to make a sugar called glucose. So glucose is just a sugar. Plants can do this. Plants, algae, and some bacteria, they can make a sugar from the air and water. So they can make it from carbon dioxide in the air, and they use water, as well as energy from the sun, to make a sugar called glucose. Now you need to know that these plants use the sun's energy to make their food. They do not use the energy to make their energy directly. They do make their food. They make a sugar called glucose. They still have to break down that food, that sugar, to give them their energy. And that's what this says right here. Plants, trees, grass, they use the sun to make their food, which then can be converted into their energy. But they don't directly turn the energy from the sun into energy that they can use. They first need to make their food. They first need to make a sugar. And we'll go ahead and make this our last slide. This is the summary equation or formula for photosynthesis. It's right here. Will you eventually have to know it? Yes, you will. If you want to pass, or if you want to get a good grade. If you don't, then you don't need to know it. But anyways, what do plants need to make their food? Well, they need 6 carbon dioxide, 6 CO2s. They need 6 water molecules. They also need some light, and they use that to make, this is the formula for glucose. It's just a sugar. It's not exactly the sugar that you put on your Cheerios in the morning, but it's very similar. So plants use carbon dioxide and water plus light to make a sugar called glucose, and in the process, luckily for us, they release into the air oxygen gas. Oxygen. So that's what we breathe in. So it's lucky for us that the plants do that, because they release oxygen into the air, which then we can breathe. All right. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed it a little bit, and I'll talk to you next time.